before February they were saying they needed 28,000 4G base stations to cover the whole of Japan, which sounded very low when you consider that NTT Docomo's got 80,000 mobile sites. I think KDDI's got about 110,000, and SoftBank claims to have 230,000. And Rakuten's saying that with only 44,000 only 28,000 base stations, I should say, they believe they could cover the whole of Japan. And they've
Sounds
now
a bit suspicious.
But they've now had to increase that number to 44,000, which has added a huge amount onto the capital expenditure bill. So it's actually pushed capex up by about $2 billion.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Bit of shitty weather today, but we're still going to go out to the pub and sit outside after.
Hopefully with a cover over us.
Yeah. So last week I booked the old White Hart, but they got us around the corner. We weren't next to any of those heat things.
Under the cover near the heat thing?
Their website doesn't allow for specific requests, so we'll see what happens after this.
Yeah.
If it happens again, I'm going to have a word.
Yeah.
And
as we are regular customers.
I know, and then I was thinking of having a bite to eat after, but today's so shit. And obviously you could still only eat outside. On Monday you can eat inside.
Right.
On Monday there's no coronavirus inside. Today inside is riddled with coronavirus.
I think this is a government engineered weather to stay inside.
Unless the Indian variant upsets everything.
Well, that's true. Well, variants in
But they
general.
can't really cancel Monday's reopening now. It's too late, isn't it? Unless there's an announcement
Poacher
today.
keeps coming and going, well, it seems all right. But be careful. I mean, how do you be
people
careful?
carefully? Oh, we haven't done any hugging. I thought we were going to do.
Well, you got to do the
hugging.
hugging. There's the advice on the BBC about hugging, where you've got to
Yeah.
sort of avert your gaze.
That's it.
Yeah.
You hug while you're masked, or you look
Yeah.
away from each other.
You
as
smell
hug.
bad, hug.
You should hug and then spray the person.
Because that's what you do when you hug, isn't it? Naturally, anyway. Obviously, you just you don't
Yeah.
really want to get close. You just.
Oh, I think there's even advice on like more sort of intimate encounters than hugging.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, those are just cancelled.
So there's a way of doing that without infecting someone.
Well, I
with
don't know. There's some
coronavirus.
kind of best practice.
Jesus.
Anyway, this
is
is
really
a
off
family
topic.
show, so I'm not going to get into that. Okay, what are we going to chat about? Again, it hasn't been the most busy week. I was chatting to Phil, your editor, and we were lamenting how the sort of normal news cycle, for us, quite determined by Mobile World Congress in the first half of the year,
Can be.
just isn't there. And I just think there's a more than average number of quiet weeks. It sort of compensates for last year, where every week we were writing about coronavirus or how 5G gives you coronavirus or something like that. And there was just so much cool, abnormal stuff to write about.
Yeah.
It almost feels like this year is
I
like
think the other problem
Newtonian
is
recoil from that.
There's been a lot of, last year I think people quite got into this whole Zoom event stuff, didn't they, as a substitute for the physical thing, and I think people are sick of doing it now.
Yeah, they call it video fatigue.
Video fatigue, yeah.
Yeah,
People don't even want to have normal calls on Zoom anymore. They just want to go back to using a phone.
I see.
And I increasingly notice when I do calls with other companies on Zoom that they don't have their video switched on. Because who wants to be sitting in their room? You've probably been sitting around in your pajamas, even senior executives. Yeah.
There's no real need for it. Yeah.
I slightly disagree. Because you still get some kind of non-verbal cues from Zoom that you wouldn't without any video at all.
You do, but
it's obviously nowhere now. That's why we're in the studio now instead of doing it remotely. We could have just stayed lazy.
yeah, but we're in person.
So obviously this is better than Zoom.
Yeah.
But I still reckon Zoom is better in terms of non-verbal cues than
Can't
no
hug
video
somebody
at all.
on Zoom, Scott.
No, I'm surprised
Even
they don't
safely.
insist. I'm surprised they don't insist that we all go full avatar, because that's safe, isn't it?
Yeah, or Surrogate.
Yes.
Bruce Willis movie.
Yeah,
Oh,
avatar
God, I've seen that
/
for
surrogate.
ages.
Anyway, but having said that, we found three things to talk about. We're going to start by talking about Rakuten. It's been a little while, but they're always near the top of the news in terms of them being a sort of disruptive, innovative operator. And you listened in on their quarterlies, and Mary covered it for us, and I looked at it. So I could contribute a bit, I suppose. But we'll chat about what they said on that, and maybe we'll dip into one or two other quarterlies. Quarterly season seems to drag on for about a month, doesn't it?
Yeah, people delay
Well,
it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's often quite spaced out, but I think this one's even more so.
Seems
I think
so,
the
doesn't it?
first quarter tends to be quite
Right.
You know,
Because people are getting their full year stuff together.
Well, they get their full year stuff together,
and
and that comes quite late, and then you've got your first quarter stuff almost immediately afterwards. Whereas some people obviously just think, what the hell?
We just
wait a little bit longer and then get the first quarter stuff out.
Right.
I mean, it's March, isn't it? And we're now in June.
Yes. Yeah. So they've actually got their numbers in almost 2 months ago, and they're still churning them out. Makes you wonder whether there's a bit of creative accounting going on. Not pointing any fingers, lawyers. Okay. So we chat about them. Then we're going to talk about, there was, this isn't even like a press release or quarterlies or anything like that, but there was a story in the Chinese media. And I take Chinese media, and Wei has sort of said, yeah, this is a fairly decent assumption. I take Chinese media to be fairly representative of the will of the Communist Party.
Especially when it's the Global Times.
Global Times, which is owned by the People's Daily. Yep. There's a bit of a clue there, isn't it? But even if it wasn't, even if they're as independent as it's possible to be in China, I don't think you get too far writing stories that piss off the Communist Party. So at the very least, if Chinese media is writing something, it's not antagonistic to the party line. But in the case of Global Times, which is basically the English translation of the People's Daily, as far as I can tell, we can take it to be fairly representative of Chinese Communist Party policy. And they were saying some stuff about Ericsson and Sweden and all that sort of thing, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
And then we're going to conclude talking about Ericsson. Ericsson did, every year or so, it does this sort of consumer study where it seems to get properly stuck in. I think it went to about 26 countries and does some proper bit of research as to what everyone's all about. I think you have to take the way it writes out with a pinch of salt, because it's not going to go, we concluded that 5G is a complete fucking waste of time. Because it's really not in Ericsson's interest to conclude that. But if you allow for that, I
would love it if they wrote that in one of their consumer labs reports.
And we're pivoting to burgers. But there's still some interesting findings there. And they weren't necessarily unconditionally cheerleading on behalf of 5G. So that's what we'll do. And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other platforms. Before we get into Rakuten, which I will hand over to you, Ian, there is one little thing that's worth chatting about. So our mate Danielle Royston, who, for people who haven't seen previous podcasts, she's got, is it Telco DR? Is that her company?
That's her company, yeah. And
basically it's an unapologetic cheerleader for the public cloud in a telco context. And, I don't think either of us have ever denied that there's a lot to be said there's lots in favour of the public cloud in terms of efficiency, in terms of agility, scalability, in terms of just basically plugging yourself into the cloud matrix. But our reservation, which seems to just be us, and this thing I'm about to allude to would appear to confirm that, is that you are still handing over a hell of a lot of your infrastructure, of your capital, to a third party.
Yeah.
And which is fine as long as everything's good, but when it's not, it'd be like me, I don't know, it'd be like you buying my mortgage off me and going, all right, Scott, I own your mortgage now. You pay me instead of the building society. And then one day we fall out because I cuss one of your articles or something. And you just go, right, well, I'm kicking you out your fucking house.
Yeah.
Because I own your mortgage now.
Yeah.
It probably never happen. I don't think I've ever cussed one of your articles.
Well,
and in fact, if you own the mortgage on my house, I'd be even less likely to. but that's a problem in itself, isn't it? Because you've got dominion over me then. Sorry, what were you about to say?
I was just going to say, I don't have an issue with the idea of putting servers and IT workloads into the public cloud. I don't have an issue with that per se. My problem is that it's heavily dominated by a small number of companies. Yes. And the problem is the public cloud's attractive because those companies are so big that they can offer efficiencies that you wouldn't get if you did it through a private cloud arrangement. So it becomes
self-perpetuating.
But at the same time, the fact that they're so big and that that viable competitors to them probably won't emerge, and it's probably actually going to become more skewed heavily towards those companies than it already is. I think they have about according to Canalys, I think they've got about 60% of the market, and then Alibaba's got like 7 or 8, which is obviously all China.
The next biggest.
And then you've got a bunch of others, but I suspect it's probably going to go even more heavily toward,
because you get the network effect, and you get the Pareto principle where
exactly, and we have the same issue then, I think, with dependence on a small number of very powerful companies, and to me, it's a lot more concerning than. Like, we talk about this in radio equipment all the time, where operators fuss about having only Ericsson and Nokia and Huawei, and now possibly only Ericsson and Nokia. Now Huawei's being booted out. Well, yeah, but you can replace your radio equipment, and it costs you money, and we're working on standards to make it easier to do that, through Open RAN and stuff. Whereas public cloud, people don't seem to have thought about this, except some policy. The White House of Representatives, to its credit, in its October report, had a big section on the public cloud about how difficult it would be to move from one to another. And, people like James Crawshaw, to give him due credit, who's an analyst at Ondia, part of our group, has written a report sort of suggesting what he thinks people should do, which is not to try and be too heavily dependent on one, but maybe split resources between them and keep some in-house. But I bet you there are disincentives to doing that. Yeah, there would be. But for someone just to say this makes sense and there's I have no reservations at all, to me, is disingenuous. I think. I think so. I think everybody has to realise there's a negative side to this.
Yeah, and it's not at all out of order to reflect on it. I mean, look, to further emphasise how I haven't got some kind of bee in my bonnet, I wrote up a story today where SpaceX, Elon Musk, low Earth orbit satellite company, they've got into bed with Google Cloud, it's about working with large organisations. It's about helping them work with large organisations. And I said, my concluding sort of sentences were, to be fair, this is a great use of the public cloud and just the sort of thing it's designed for. Satellites are rarely, if ever, going to be the sole source of connectivity, so making such services available in a dynamic and flexible way is critical.
Yeah.
So that's what the cloud's all about, this sort of sea of services that you can switch between seamlessly.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you've got fibre or conventional cellular connectivity, you're going to go for that. But if you're a large company and you, like an IoT company, for example, and you need seamless connectivity guaranteed all the time, you want to be able to fall back onto satellite at the very least. And the most dynamic way to do that is if everything's accessed through the cloud. So totally, that's spot on.
Yeah, and that point's really valid, because the way that things could potentially go and seem to be moving in this direction already in Western Europe, for instance, is that all the big telecom incumbents now have deals with the same people, the cloud. And it's not just cloud, it seems to come with a lot of other stuff bundled with it. So, we talked about this last week, I think Vodafone's arrangement with Google for this Neuron nucleus, whatever you want to call it, dynamo platform.
Super kilo zap.
Is all about them using their artificial intelligence to help, Vodafone make decisions. A lot of them are in bed with the cloud.
And they're really good at this analytics and AI stuff.
The analytics, the edge is an area where
that's what this Google thing is.
Extension of the cloud.
Sorry, this SpaceX thing is edge.
So edge is a natural extension of the cloud, but that's an area where operators originally thought they'd have a bigger role, I think, than they do. So it's not just the cloud as in let's put some servers here. It's almost taking control of the whole network, to be honest, in its ultimate form. And the company that's gone furthest with this, obviously, at the moment is Dish in the US, company building a fourth mobile network. And if you look at that deal, and I spoke with Mark Ruan.
I'm so pleased you mentioned
this
Dish,
week,
because that's what I'm going to talk about in a sec.
Well, I spoke with Mark Ruan's the chief network officer
Nokia.
this week.
I've had dinner with him.
And have you?
Yeah, in Barcelona. Him and Marcus Weldon.
Right.
Nokia passed.
So he was talking about the arrangement, and did a really good job of selling it. But it's clear that that AWS and Dish, in that particular scenario where Dish is really all in with the public cloud, is taking a lot of there's a lot of things that AWS is doing that you wouldn't expect just any old vendor to be doing.
Yeah, it's very intimate partnership.
It's very intimate. Its whole edge relationship seems to be based around this. There's even hardware that's being provided by AWS in this relationship. These chips that it's using instead of Intel ones potentially in the future. There's implications for other companies that Dish has used on the orchestration side, like VMware, although Dish says it will still have VMware in there. But it's it's much more than just saying
it's creating that kind of thin client thing.
Yeah.
We,
Dean Bubley.
So one of the people who's most inclined to comment on the pod, nearly always positively on Twitter, is analyst Dean Bubley, and he mentioned when we're talking about something different. We're talking about the tower companies getting into active infrastructure and this thin client thing,
which I think is part of the same.
He's been
part of the
talking
same
about for a
thing.
while.
It's all about efficiency now and trying to minimise your costs.
Well, exactly. So it's all part of the same.
It's like a race to the bottom,
mega
almost,
trend,
isn't
it?
Like become as asset light as possible and let other people do what
Well, exactly. So
we've almost created another topic here in our.
Well, we have, and I'm going to move it along just because it's not a stated topic, but it's interesting. Nothing we've chatted about isn't good juicy stuff. But so Danielle Royston, who runs this pro public cloud setup, has got a newsletter called DR's Telco in 20. I don't know what the 20 refers to. And a latest newsletter they sent was all systems go for Barcelona. Here's the latest on Cloud City. So she's obviously filled the vacuum left by Ericsson.
Yeah.
And her whole thing, for which I think we both applauded her, is just like, okay, let's make it, let's capitalise on this opportunity and let's put our money where our mouth is and big up public cloud for telcos.
Did she fill the vacuum just in terms of floor space?
She's filled it in terms of floor space.
She's paying them
and
as
I
well.
think we still don't really know what to expect in terms of what companies will be there exactly and what.
No.
I mean, she's put some stuff out on Twitter about what it looks like, and it looks quite impressive. But
well,
I don't know if
how
she know. Huh?
How can she know?
Well, hold on a second.
She's mocked up how the stand is supposed to look.
Oh, the stand, right.
The stand.
Yeah, she's got our vision for Cloud City. But then she goes, the most exciting news this week is that Cloud City, all capitalised, is sold out, all capitalised. We've got super cool vendors. So, look,
sounds like great salesmanship.
I mean, I've chatted to Danielle quite a while. She's really enthusiastic. She's very American. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Is American,
but,
apparently.
Yeah, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But, lots of superlatives, lots of enthusiasm, lots of energy. And so she goes, we've got super cool vendors and all that sort of thing. And that's all fine. Good for you, Danielle. But then later on in the thing, she goes... And she's got all these bullets about how great it's all going to be. And she goes, on the flip side, I've been surprised by a negative reaction to the deal and some elements of the press. In his dissection of the Dish announcement, Scott Baceno says it is, quote, desperate to justify relinquishing control of its network to a third party. Elsewhere, very much second on our list. Elsewhere, Ian Morris warned that more telcos moving to the public cloud would leave them, quote, locked in, asset light, and nearly indistinguishable. Ooh, that's a tough one after a beer or two. Indistinguishable from each other. And then she concludes, and this is a bit where I'm all in favour of getting called out. We're shooting from the hip. We're saying some quite opinionated stuff. It may end up being bollocks.
Yeah.
But I just think then she sort of lapsed into some sort of straw manish stuff.
We must have her on the podcast now.
Oh, definitely. Well, hopefully we'll do. If we go to Barcelona, we still don't know for sure, but the chances are we're probably going to go, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Then definitely, I'm sure we'll do some video with her and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If she doesn't get pissed off about this segment in the podcast.
Well, I don't think we're saying nasty things about her.
No, well, I'm finished yet.
Yeah. Okay, go on then.
No, I'm not going to.
The gloves are off.
But then she goes, it's a dangerous game to advise telco executives to put their head in the sand. Now, I think the use of dangerous is just needless. I mean, invoking sort of safetyism as if our reporting to sort of go, hold on a minute, is somehow dangerous, might somehow cause harm, I think is misguided. And then she goes, put their head in the sand and hide from the public cloud trend. So she's basically going, it's inevitable, and stop fighting it. And then she goes, would it be better if the public cloud didn't exist? Probably. And I thought, that's an interesting...
Well, I think she's thinking...
rhetorical question.
She's saying what we seem to be saying.
All right, but then she should have phrased it better, because it read to me like she was saying that. And I thought, that seems to slightly undermine your whole raison d'etre, Danielle. And she goes, is that reality? No. Fair enough. It's not going anywhere. And so my advice to telco execs is to understand how your competitors would use it and how you can best them by using it too.
Well, maybe she isn't actually saying what we're saying there. Maybe because the way she's put the two sentences together, then it sounds like she's But to me, that doesn't change the point that we're making, which is that, yes, I can certainly take her point about it being inevitable, and that's why I would never say
I think it is.
Vodafone and Deutsche Telekom and all these other companies that deals with Azure. I can see why Johan Weiberg at Vodafone says things like, look, we can't possibly do this on our own. We need Google's help to do it. And why, Dish thinks that it's, best bet to realise efficiencies is to get in bed with AWS. I just think that the final destination is not a place that looks very nice, I don't think. I think it's a place where telcos are really diminished, where we're very, very reliant as a planet then on three big US mega companies for communications infrastructure across massive swathes of the planet.
And God knows how much they collude with each other.
And it's probably not an
well.
issue for individual telcos. This is why we have regulators coming along and looking at things like this. This is why we've got the House of Representatives doing reports saying this needs to be thought about. It's the same reason that the oil companies were broken up, in 1900 or whenever. It was a bit later than that. But, it's...
I completely agree.
I'm not saying they should necessarily be broken up, but I think it's something that needs to be thought about, and I think it's something that's a little bit scary, actually.
I think that's probably critical. So to nuance the whole thing, to get it out there, there's if we meet up with Danielle, we'll have a beer and we'll have a giggle. There's no friction. There's just different perspectives on all this, and we're cautious, and she's evangelical, and that's fine. We're each entitled to our opinion. But where I completely agree with you is I think it's already overdue that this shit gets regulated properly.
Yeah.
Just like telco already is.
Yeah. And it doesn't make sense. And here's the real contradiction. It doesn't make sense that telcos are running around at the moment going, Open RAN. We need Open RAN because we need supply diversity. In a bit of the network that, to be quite honest with you, accounts for a fairly small bit of spending, and that you can swap anyway. You have to spend the money, but you can swap it. And yet they're not at all concerned about the fact that there's these three mega companies that are basically running the planet, it seems, these days. And you look at the way stock market values have gone in the last year, it's all very heavily skewed one way. And a cloud deal to me is much more all in, I think.
Yes.
And a much more bigger
intimate,
change.
Hard to reverse
than putting some radio equipment up.
Yes.
And yet they're not saying anything about that at all. They're just quite happy to. Now, possibly that's because people haven't done it yet. Most people haven't put their systems in the public cloud in the telecom sector. But to just advocate that everybody should.
But it does seem inevitable. I mean, I agree with Danielle.
To just evangelise that everybody should do that.
Well,
I agree,
Danielle, that it's inevitable, but that's probably the thing that freaks me out the most.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Just because it's inevitable doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah, and maybe what needs to be thought about is ways, in the same way that they're now thinking about ways to make it easier to swap from Ericsson to somebody else and how to introduce smaller suppliers and make sure it works. That's possibly what needs to happen in the public cloud. Now, I don't know if it's going to be that easy in the public cloud because, as we just said, how can anybody possibly stand up to an AWS or a Google?
We've got to do that if we go to Mobile World Congress. We have Pierre there with his sort of shoulder camera. We just got to go up to public cloud people and going, why are you trying to take over the world? Ask them really shitty little doorstep rhetorical question. Okay, but that's not even an official segment. I just thought, it's nice to get called out in a little newsletter.
Yeah.
So anyway, Rakuten.
I've got a lot of respect for her, and I think she's doing a good job.
And
but,
Jesus Christ, to make something,
what we want, isn't it?
To make something of the wreckage of Mobile World Congress through no fault of GSMAs, just because of circumstances. Then we need people to step up. Hope you're listening, Erickson, because it's because you bottled it. Anyway,
which one do you want?
I have an echo.
He wants an echo.
Just change.
So I was about to hand over to you, and you're sitting there working out what beer to have.
Sorry.
So
before we go into the Rakuten segment, can we please give credit to Ken Willen for the best headline ever?
Oh yeah.
What was that? I've forgotten that already.
So Ken did a story on Rakuten a few months ago with the headline "Rah Rah Rakuten, lover of the Open RAN." which for anyone who's around in the 70s, then
Boney M.
The Swedish listeners will be.
But even you, were they a Swedish band?
I thought they were part Dutch, part sort of.
No, German,
Jamaican. Oh, really?
German.
All right.
Okay.
Now I'm really confused.
Right, okay, we just had to cut out there because we had a little tech support problem, but now we're back and we're going to hand straight over to Ian, who's going to talk about Rakuten's quarterlies, aren't you?
What, about half an hour into the pod? That was our first
Yes.
topic.
Yeah,
26
you better
minutes.
keep it short and sweet, mate. Anyway, yeah, they did all right. Next topic.
Brilliant. Yeah, go Rakuten. No, they're like high profile, obviously, Rakuten. They're a Japanese company, Japanese e-commerce company. Sort of the Japanese Amazon, really, but a lot smaller. And dramatically announced a push into telecom a couple of years ago.
I thought they were more content than e-commerce. Shows what I know.
They're in all sorts of things.
Right.
They've got banking stuff. They've got fintech.
So the general
they've got an e-commerce
digital
arm. They've
giant.
got there's like an app you can download on the smart TV for videos and
I
stuff.
know. I see it like on my telly.
So they're in all sorts. I mean, if you so I start with the earnings. The interesting thing is that all anybody wants to know about at the moment, it seems, on the analyst calls, is the mobile side of things.
Even though
and
that's
yet you
just
have to
one
sit through
string
this
to their bow.
earnings presentation where mobile takes up 5 minutes of an hour-long presentation. Then it goes to the Q&A, and all the questions are about the mobile. And the reason all the questions are about mobile is because they're basically running up massive losses because of this telecom plan that they've got. So you look at Rakuten before they announced this move to build a fourth mobile network in Japan, and they were very, very profitable company, and that has all changed quite drastically.
And so investors and analysts are like, hello.
Yeah, and so investors or analysts are like, does this make sense? Is it going to pay off? And I think, people have been quite faithful. I mean, if you look at the company's share price performance over the last sort of couple of years, they still look quite healthy, but it dipped this week about 4%, I think, on the day of the earnings announcement. And the reason for that is the losses are just, they've done very well in certain other areas, but if you just look at the mobile business alone and the operating loss there, I think it was almost $1 billion US dollars
In a quarter.
In a quarter. Because of this scaled up plan that they've had to announce. So they basically underestimated quite badly how many base stations they would need to cover the whole of Japan.
I don't understand how you can do that.
Neither do I.
mean,
And they've not
a base station has a coverage radius.
Yeah, well, I mean,
You just get a map and put pins on it.
yeah, I can speculate on some of the reasons, having been on calls with there's CTO of Rakuten Mobile, Tarek Amin, who's talked a little bit about this. I can speculate on why, and they've not sort of explicitly said why they think they need more. But I think one of the reasons is they're very constrained on the spectrum they have with 4G. So they only have, I think, about 20 megahertz across the whole of Japan to use for 4G, which is a lot less than the other carriers have. And a lot of that spectrum at the moment is being used by the Ministry of Defence. So they're actually squeezed into about 5 megahertz.
Oh my God. So their capacity.
But even when it's freed up, it's a lot less on 4G than other operators. So I think one of the reasons they need more base stations is perhaps to try and deal with this, this kind of capacity issue that they have to put, less spectrum. You tend to have to put more equipment in to try and make up for it.
Okay, so it's not a matter of using higher frequency spectrum with a shorter range. It's
I don't
just
think
a
it's
matter
even
of
that.
boosting,
I just think it's
getting
boosting,
the most out of
boosting
what-
signals because they just don't have enough. They don't have enough spectrum in there. So I've been on earnings calls where they've sort of said, well, it's because of projected customer growth and how much people are using data services. But to be honest with you, that doesn't really wash with me because subscriber take up to this service has been disappointing. I mean, I think, they're going to say, we never expected to do what Jio did in India and have sort of tens, millions of users. By this
Tarek Amin
stage.
would know about that, wouldn't
Yeah, but let's be honest, Japan's a big country. It's 125 million people. And 1 year after having launched their services, they only have 4
It's
million.
easy to forget that, isn't it? Like twice the population of the UK.
It's a big country. So one year after they've launched their 4G service, they've only got 4 million applications. That doesn't even mean all of those people are on the network. But even being generous, and let's say they all are, 4 million applications in a market of 125 million people, where NTT Docomo has 80 million subscribers, is not very good. And I think a lot of financial analysts have been quite disappointed by the take-up. And what they've had to do is adjust, pricing plans and make new offers and try and do anything they can to sort of attract customers onto the network, and a lot of that's involved making services for free of charge for a long time.
Yes.
So I don't think anybody's really been paying on the network up till now.
Right, well, and that's the sort of Jio model as well, isn't it?
And they've, there's a couple of good things have happened recently. They've managed to get a deal for the iPhone, which apparently is Japan's most popular device. I think about 50% of Japanese mobile customers have iPhones. despite the fact they've got their own brands, like
Sony.
Sharp and Sony and stuff. They're very
Sony's
very
kind of bailed though, isn't it?
Yeah, so
Throwing the towel in.
that I think that's helped a bit, but they just
still
don't
make good
have
earbuds though, Pierre,
Yeah.
and cheaper than Apple ones.
They just
We were chatting about this
haven't
before.
had the subscriber take up that I think they might have hoped for, and they've got and they've had to up the amount of base stations quite dramatically. So I think before February they were saying they needed 28,000 4G base stations to cover the whole of Japan, which sounded very low when you consider that NTT Docomo's got 80,000 mobile sites. I think KDDI's got about 110,000, and SoftBank claims to have 230,000. And Rakuten's saying that with only 44,000 only 28,000 base stations, I should say, they believe they could cover the whole of Japan. And they've
Sounds
now
a bit suspicious.
But they've now had to increase that number to 44,000, which has added a huge amount onto the capital expenditure bill. So it's actually pushed capex up by about $2 billion. And in the meantime, there's been very, very little said about 5G at all. And that was kind of the focus of my coverage because
5G is the point.
Because 5G is the big thing. I mean, they're a state-of-the-art company. They're using all these new cloud and software technologies. Do they really want to be a company that rolls out a 10-year-old technology and that all the focus goes into that? No, presumably 5G should be a much bigger.
Do they know something we don't?
And yet, if you look at
they're trying to lead you to believe, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the figures, the number of 5G base stations they have at the moment is only 1,000. And
it's not going to do it.
And okay, it's early days for 5G. So I thought, well, I'll take a look at what the other operators claim to have deployed. And they're way behind. I mean, nobody's got anywhere near like 200,000, but I think NTT Docomo is now saying it has about 7,000. KDDI is claiming 10. And these companies are aiming to have between 20 and 50,000 by March next year, whereas Rakuten said nothing at all about this. And if you look at the capex budget that it's got, which is about $1 trillion that analysts have said it needs to spend in total on rolling out its network, about 80% of that seems to be dedicated to 4G.
Right.
And even when they announced this dramatic increase in the number of base stations they needed to build. And they ended up having to sell shares in the company to fund this. They sold shares to Tencent and Walmart and Japan Post and raised exactly $2 billion.
Pension funds or something.
But if you look at where they're planning on using that $2 billion, most of it's actually channeled into 4G. It's almost all going into the 4G network. So there's been very, very little about what they're doing on the 5G side of things.
It's a weird thing. I mean, I've never been to Japan. I'd love to. I love the culture, I love the history, I love the food. But my assumption about sort of Japanese corporate culture was always slightly on the conservative side, a bit stuffy, a bit buttoned down. But you look at companies like Rakuten, you look at companies like SoftBank, and they're quite buccaneering. They're just chucking money around.
They're not understated, yeah.
Yeah, they might be understated in their presentation, but then when it comes to pulling the trigger, they just go...
I don't think they see themselves as traditional, sort of like in the mould of...
I
mean, they're very much trying to be disruptive and presenting themselves...
Nintendo.
I mean, I think the CEO of Rakuten is also the founder, Hiroshi Mikitani. I think he's almost made it that English, for instance, is the language that gets used in offices. He wants it to be very much... an international focus and
fair enough.
But I mean, if I'm trying to be sympathetic to them with this telecom plan that they've got and see it from their side and try and sort of let's look at the long view of this. There's a few things that could play in their favour. They're highly automated compared to the other companies. There's a lot of legacy they haven't had to use.
Yeah, the whole greenfield shtick.
And you talk to Tarek Amin about this, and he says it's going to be much harder for those companies to take advantage of those things because they've just got to maintain older systems. They'd have people in the organisation who, don't have a software mindset, and I think that's a fair comment. This is an e-commerce company. Remember, it's like Japan's Amazon. So, and I think
DevOps crops up as a concept every now and then.
No doubt about it. And the fact they have all these other things. When one thing they've been talking about increasingly recently is that they can push mobile users to their other products, and they can push the users of other products towards their mobile offerings. So there's a lot of cross-selling that can go on there.
Plan.
They can sort of build this ecosystem, if you like, and tie in the way that Amazon ties you into its services, and you end up publishing books through them even eventually.
That's a good point. Did you want to arrive?
It did arrive, but I didn't bring it in
I brought
today.
one
But well, you should. That was a key for you to get your novel out. But even in the same
I'll
way,
do it now. You mean books like this, Ian?
we should make a bigger deal of that.
Well, no, I don't want to be unprofessional. This isn't about my publishing exploits.
But in the same way, you can have that people become Amazon consumers and they take everything from Amazon, and who knows, in the future they might even buy a telecom service from Amazon. Rakuten's sort of doing that, and that could really work to its advantage, especially if it can sell things at low cost, and it can be more profitable through automation and all of this stuff. And then the other thing they're trying to do is not just be an operator in Japan. They're trying to take their all the technologies they've used, which are very new, very innovative. They've even bought companies that are providing the radio software, for instance, and the operational support systems that are used in the network. They're actually the majority owner in these companies. They're trying to actually take that, put it into a platform that they can sell to other operators. So they're almost becoming a vendor.
Yes. That was one of the things that struck me about Mary's coverage of it.
Right.
That was a big string to their bow, is that we're going to make...
Sure.
I mean,
and ultimately, that could be a much bigger deal for them than actually having an operator in Japan.
I'm still not sure. I mean, I don't want to go off on especially as we had a big tangent that wasn't even one of our topics to start with. I don't want to go off on an Open RAN tangent, but there are a hell of a lot of variables that I've got to be convinced of before I think being an Open RAN sort of platform vendor is a viable business proposition.
It's not just Open RAN. I mean, Open RAN would be a part of it, but they would sell... the OSS and the BSS as well. They would sell automation tools.
But again, what they do has got to be an order of magnitude better for other operators to buy it.
Yeah, completely.
So there's just a lot of
and
ifs.
that's why.
I mean, it might happen, but there's a lot of variables.
But this is why this is the slight flaw in the plan. Perhaps is that for a start, they're facing a lot of competition from what we've just been talking about. Kind of off topic, the public cloud is getting into this area. That's a challenger to them.
Right. So they're trying to flog OSS, BSS. Meanwhile, Amazon, Google, Microsoft are getting better and better at that sort of thing themselves.
Well, the platform side of
especially
things,
the OSS
in terms
side.
of where you put your systems and where they reside, is something that Rakuten's trying to get involved in as well. And they would run it. I think their main focus is to actually run a lot of their systems over the private cloud. But you've got companies like Microsoft now.
Did you hear that, Danielle? Private cloud.
Buying software vendors. I think last year, who did it buy? It bought two companies that do core network software that you could run through the sort of Azure cloud. And they're obviously starting to compete in the same space.
Yeah. So who's to say that one of those three won't do all the BSS, OSS?
And then they face a challenge from the classic sort of guys who've done this sort of thing. The Ericssons and the Nokias of this world are obviously trying to be in that space as well. So there's a lot of competition for them. And the thing that they need to be able to do, I think, is prove that this model really works and is really worth it. And for that to prove that, what they've got to do is get this network working in Japan really well and efficiently. So anything.
Why would you buy shit off them if they're not even making money themselves?
And that's why I think the longer it takes for this Japanese project to pay off, to break even and to be.
And they said we aim to achieve break even fiscal year 23.
Yeah, and this is why I'm a little bit dubious about this 2023 thing. For a start, there's quite a good note that came out from a company called New Street Research, which is like a sort of broker firm, saying that they're now very doubtful that Rakuten can break even unless it gets 20 million customers, which is a massive, a huge number more than it's 16 million more than it's got. Is going to be in a year when they've been offering services for free, they've managed to get 4 million. They're now going to start charging for services and need to get another 16 million.
Yeah,
that's going to be a tall order. And at the same time, the point of my article is they've had nothing really to say about 5G is a costly thing to NTT Docomo thinks it's going to spend between 2019 and 2023. Its estimate of its 5G capex is 1 trillion Japanese yen, which is the same. That's about $9 billion. And that is the same as Rakuten's entire budget, according to Moffett-Nathanson, which is another analyst firm, for its whole network rollout. And yet most of that seems to be focused on 4G. There's very little of it that's actually been assigned to 5G.
So as you say, you're just looking at all these numbers, all these promises, all these don't worry about it, it'll all sort itself out.
Either they reckon they can do 5G dirt cheap, and if they do, then I want to know how, or they're going to have to spend a hell of a lot more to get 5G rolled out, in which case, how do they reach this 2023 break-even target unless they get millions more subscribers? Or they don't roll out 5G very quickly at all, and they end up a long way behind NTT Docomo, SoftBank, and KDDI. So those are the three scenarios.
It seems to me, if I'm an equity analyst or an investor listening on this call, he's making a lot of promises. He's going, look, just bear with us. It'll all be cool. It'll all sort itself out. Yes, there's a lot of short-term capex. Yes, we're losing money on mobile right now. But just you wait till 23, then the pendulum will swing, and we'll start kicking ass. But and maybe it will.
They've not explained. The problem with that is I don't think it's been explained very well how they get to. The focus at the moment is not on building a 4G. It shouldn't be, to me, but on building a 4G network. 4G is a 10-year-old technology. You're telling me that a company that claims to be the most advanced network company in the world is focused on rolling out a 10-year-old technology. I don't care whether you're using Open RAN, cloud software, whatever you want to call it. All the attention's on 5G, and these companies, NTT Docomo and SoftBank and KDDI, are talking about having 20 to 50,000 base stations by March next year, and we've heard nothing from Rakuten. They didn't respond to a question that was asked by me about how many base stations they plan to roll out, what's the rollout plan, and
they just didn't address it.
And they haven't said what they're planning on spending on 5G. Most of the capex seems to be, this sale of shares that happened, that raised another 2 billion. They've even stated that actually that almost all of that's going towards 4G. So what are they going to do? Are they going to finish the 4G rollout and go, well, that's good enough, we don't have to worry too much about 5G? That's not very compelling. I don't think they're going to do that. So they're going to have to. And
if you're an investor, you start to worry when you've got these very capital intensive industries. Like we're not slated to talk about it, but chips is another one, and everyone's always talking about chucking fucking 100 billion at making fabs and all that sort of thing. And you have these capital intensive businesses, and the thinking always is the barriers to entry are really high. I remember this when I was covering global foundries like 10, 15 years ago, and they got the Dubai or Abu Dhabi, some Middle Eastern sovereign wealth fund involved, and they've obviously got shitloads of oil cash.
Mubadala, wasn't it?
That's it, yeah. And they got all this oil cash, and they just went, we need somewhere to put it, and we don't want to stick it in the bank. And
NFTs.
Yeah, NFTs. Fungible. That's such a funny word. Makes me think of mushrooms.
Yeah, fungi. Truffles.
And you think this is a good investment because there's not many people in the world who can just suddenly front up $100 billion.
Yeah.
Which is which is like the table stakes for getting into this game of chips or building out greenfield 5G networks with all the infrastructure that supports it. But if you can afford it, then you're laughing because you've got this unique resource that no one can compete with. And that's what I get the impression of with Rakuten and some of the stuff that SoftBank gets involved with as well, which is why I generalised about Japan. But people must start losing their nerve because no one's got limitless funds, and the more you need to keep tapping the money markets for more money, the more you're going to have to either dilute your own equity or get in debt, or generally weaken your strategic position.
It just doesn't look very good that their big story when they came along was that they could really disrupt the Japanese market by using these lower cost but very advanced technologies that would allow you to build out a network at a fraction of the cost of what it would normally, you normally have to spend, and run your network at a fraction of the cost of what you normally have to spend. It doesn't look very good that they've had to sell part of the company now to fund rollout. That losses are now on the mobile side are at about $900 million US dollars in a quarter, I think, is the figure, and that they're not really saying very much about what their 5G plans on at all.
Dollars.
it doesn't look good, does it? They're the poster boy for Open RAN and a lot of this other stuff.
You're basically asking people to hold their nerve for about another 2 years.
They're asking investors for a lot of faith.
Exactly.
To show a lot of faith, I think. And I think investors have showed a lot of faith, but there's, as I say, I think there's signs that it's wavering a little bit.
Yeah, I would be. I mean, I've had it, I've mentioned it on the pod before. When we had the start of the pandemic and all the stock markets went down the toilet, I thought, okay, this is an opportunity to buy some stuff at a discount. And I got a hold of a few quid, nothing major, I'm only a journalist, and did a bit of mucking about with stocks and shares, and they've done all right. My speculation on stocks and shares is up about 50%. Just, you can't argue that, can you?
Yeah.
I mean, not that much money. Now, in hindsight, I wish I'd just fucking remortgaged the house. There we are, sort of. And then I put a greater proportion of what I had to play with into more what we used to call unit trusts, like funds. Mm-hmm. And they're less volatile, less upside, less downside, because I'm quite risk averse, and it's my family's money. I don't want to just go chucking it, blowing a lot on a horse or something.
Yeah.
And recently, since February, the shares are all right. They've kind of held their ground, but some of the funds I put money in have gone down the toilet. Mm. A lot of them are China-associated ones, because we've had this crazy stuff going on with Xi Jinping hassling the masters of the universe there. Mm-hmm. So sort of Alibaba, Tencent, all that sort of thing. And they've gone down the toilet, and there's just been other things,
the past 3 days, inflation.
So there've been people shitting it about inflation, so that's affected like North American and European stuff. Mm. You've got the resurgence of the pandemic in India, so lots of people losing their nerve. And
Elon Musk not accepting Bitcoin anymore.
I know. I mean, I've never bought any Bitcoin. But there have been times, I mean, it's gone up. If I bought it like even 2 years ago, I'd have like quadrupled my cash or something, wouldn't I?
What?
Even more than that?
Yeah, 10 times.
10 times.
And Dogecoin was, put it this way, Dogecoin a month ago was at like 13 cents of a dollar, and it went as high as 70 cents a week ago. And
then Elon Musk, I mean, it's basically all about Elon Musk.
That's the thing.
Then he goes on Saturday Night Live and goes, it's all bullshit.
He's pumping and dumping it. Anybody else?
I don't know if he's even pumping and dumping now. I mean, I know he's like the smartest man in the world and stuff, but I don't know if he's in pump and dump. I think he's shooting from the hip.
He's influencing the stock. Well, it's not a stock.
I think there's an aspect
as soon as
of his
put something on Twitter about we weren't allowed to buy cars with this anymore, then it massively affects the share price. But there's the thing.
Wait, when he invested $1.5 billion back in whenever that was
in Bitcoin,
you think he didn't know about the environmental? Of course, he did.
Quite. That's completely disingenuous.
Yeah,
but I can also understand.
We just found out about this.
But I can also understand that as a corporate thing, where everyone suddenly starts going, "Oh, you're killing the planet."
Which is the opposite of what this company specifically is existing
it's all green and
to
everything.
do. Yeah.
Anyway, this is a sideline. The reason I bring it up is just from my tiny bit of exposure, and I'm watching these things go into the red, and I'm like, oh, fucking hell, this wasn't the plan. And I try and imagine people all in on Rakuten, and they're going, yes, I know, another quarter of massive losses. Just hang in there. It must really test your nerve. I certainly don't have the mindset or the strength of personality to be a really major investor.
No.
I would just shit myself.
But I don't think it's good for looking beyond the investment community. I don't think it's good for the Open RAN is one of the big issues in the industry at the moment, and we talk about it all the time. And not just Open RAN, but the use of software more in networks generally, and the use of cloud technologies generally. They're a cheerleader for that as well. They're all in on all this stuff, and it just doesn't look good that this is happening, because a lot of other companies are looking at them and like, oh yeah, Rakuten, we want to see what happens there. We want to see if it works out. And so far it doesn't look.
It's not adding up.
It doesn't look great, and maybe it will. As I say, I would never say it's a failed project, because who knows? In 2 years' time, they might be cleaning up, and they might be super.
Well, people were moaning about
and
Amazon for I think decades.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe 2023, maybe they'll be sitting there with 3 people running the whole network.
And they'll be going, shut up,
90%
Morris.
Profit margins, and
just laughing.
But at the moment, it just doesn't look great.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll call it a day there. So the other thing I want to talk about, you see again, I've got that thing of I should have fired up the story while we're doing the last thing. So I'm just going to find it. But basically there was a story earlier on. So this is journalism, and we don't normally cover journalism on the pod for the obvious reason that it kind of doesn't reflect that well on us. If we're reporting on other people's reports, it kind of diminishes our role in the great ecosystem. But when it's Chinese media, I think the journalism's more justified because media is different in China, isn't it? There isn't a strictly free press.
Yeah.
And I sometimes get people on the comments giving me a hard time and calling me.
Well, the reporting itself's a story. The fact that it was reported.
The fact that it was reported at all, yeah. You know, like this one guy, supposedly called Vince. I put this thing in my coverage. I should probably give the context. Yes. Okay. Well, let me read out a bit of this story from the Global Times. So the story about the Global Times. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The story on the Global Times was headlined "Exclusive: Sweden faces quote last chance close quote on Ericsson's fate in China over 5G equipment test involvement after Huawei fallout: source." And what it's basically saying is there's another round of what they call invitations to pitch for the work with the big Chinese MNOs. So Mobile, Telecom and Unicom.
And broadcast.
Yeah, I always forget them.
There's two networks, basically.
Right, okay. But basically all of China.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe it's purely on merit, but I don't think I'm too jaded to assume there's a bit of politics thrown in. And what the clear inference was from this story is, you know, Sweden's banned Huawei and ZTE. Clear inference from this story is, okay, how about China bans Ericsson? Which has obviously been a threat ever since. Boya Ekholm, the CEO of Ericsson, has been shitting himself since the start of the year. He keeps going and doing interviews with the FT and the Wall Street Journal going, no, I think we should have a nice open, everyone should play nice, we shouldn't be horrible to Chinese. And his vested interest is absolutely clear in that. He may well believe it as well. Yeah. I'm not accusing him of being completely disingenuous. But, you know, obviously he wants to be seen to be saying countries shouldn't go around banning vendors just because of their country of origin. Yeah. But this is catching up with him. Sweden's still banning Huawei and ZTE to the best of our knowledge.
Well, they're fighting them in a court at the moment. So
yeah, giving it a go, but that's not getting anywhere, I don't think.
No, but I think the very fact that, you know, Huawei's come along and taken them to court and it's being fought shows they're not going to back down. They're not just going to change their minds, are they?
Oh, I see. Yes, the fact that yes. And anyway, so that's the context. And then there was this this excerpt that I sort of pulled out from the Global Times reporting. And the Global Times, we should stress, it's part of the People's Daily, and I don't think it's at all contentious to say that if these things aren't directly Chinese Communist Party mouthpieces, they are closely monitored by it, and they're very unlikely to say anything that isn't endorsed by it, or at least that they won't be punished for saying.
It's written by Xi Jinping.
He just sits there tapping it out. Yeah, can you imagine if you're working at Global Times, you're just like you or me writing a story, and then your phone rings and you go, yeah? And he goes, yeah, it's Xi Jinping. What the fuck are you playing at? Like, oh my God. Anyway.
I don't think it's a role that would suit you, Scott, working at the Global Times. I can't see you fitting into that environment somehow.
No. And it goes, so this is a quote from the Global Times reporting. The invitation to Ericsson is just an interview opportunity rather than the final call of hiring. There's a slight sort of lost in translation sometimes in the language.
Yeah.
We'd never say final call of hiring. Since the Chinese people won't tolerate any vicious deed against them. I love some of the
it's brilliant
translated language, a vicious deed. The Chinese people, and they're constantly speaking on behalf of the Chinese people.
Yes.
In fact, this comes up to the thing that I got hassled about on the comments. And then it goes, Sweden has excluded Huawei while Ericsson is planning to continue to take orders in China, which is tantamount to smashing the bowls of Chinese companies. Again, this is a metaphor which is probably more commonplace in China than it is here. Yeah. However, they still want their own companies to continue to eat the cake of the Chinese market. Will the 1.4 billion Chinese people agree? And I chose to take issue with this.
It really is like a sort of pamphleteering.
It really is. It's very
isn't it?
propagandary. And I chose to take interest with this claiming to represent the will of the 1.4 billion Chinese people.
Yeah.
And it's presumably, even if your average Chinese person's a bit more collectivist and a bit more obedient than your average Brit, there's presumably some diversity of opinion among them. But no, not according to this. And so
they're not the Borg, are they?
Well, quite. That's the inference, isn't it? And I said, given the infrequency with which the Chinese government consults its population on anything, we're unlikely to get a conclusive answer to that question, which was a bit snarky, but I thought fair enough. Anyway, and this person, Vince, goes, they pulled that thing out in quotes, and they went, this statement, how biased, so shows, which they didn't write, shows how biased and naive the author of this article is. And then it just went on this big rant about how, maybe it's not a democracy, but they fucking get results. It's the old trains run on time argument.
Yeah.
And then I replied and said, sure thing, boss, looking forward to the next general election. And then some other bloke called Jet, with 2 T's, like Jet Li, said, election means nothing if the government can't govern. Look at the pandemic. China managed to control it within months with 1.4 billion population. Look at the so-called democracy West. Messy. Still can't control it after a year. And so I replied, good point. Despotism it is then. I just have fun with these things. Everyone's entitled to their view. But anyway, so the core point of it is, it does seem likely, on the back of that Global Times story, if we take it literally and we assume that it represents Chinese Communist Party opinion, that if Sweden doesn't change course on its ban, then Ericsson can kiss goodbye to any more Chinese work. Is that how you interpreted it?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, as you said, the fact that it's a mouthpiece of the government means you have to sort of take it seriously. And the other reason I take it seriously is because Ericsson's been warning about this anyway. They've been on earnings calls in the last few months and actually put it in their annual report that there's a risk that the Swedish government's ban on Huawei and ZTE will have consequences for Ericsson as a Swedish company in China. Yeah. They've said that themselves.
It's just a known risk.
They've been asked about it a lot by analysts on calls. So
what can you do?
So the fact that...
But this is the first time I've seen it seem almost certain that they're not getting any more Chinese work. Yeah,
I mean, I suppose there's always... You don't know what goes on behind the scenes and that report, I wouldn't take it as completely certain, but
it could just be
it does seem...
It could be what they call it, a trial balloon, something like that, where you just float things to see how people react.
We'll have to see what happens. I mean, there's another tender on at the moment. So, basically what's happened in China is there was a big tender last year, which was the first big sort of 5G tender.
And Ericsson got like 12%.
And Ericsson got about 11 or 12% of work, which is a bit more than the market share I think it had previously in 4G.
And there's a lot of cash.
And there's a lot of money because the estimates are they bought about 700,000 base stations in total last year, the Chinese operators, most of them from Chinese companies, but 11% coming from Ericsson it's a lot of business. It's a massive market. 700,000 is such a huge market that even a small share
by
of it
far the biggest telecoms market in the world
is quite a lot of money, and that's one of the reasons they've wanted to be in it, and they've seen it as a bit of a growth opportunity. And if we can increase our market share, then in a market that's growing and spending money, whereas Europe's been a bit sort of let's take it easy on 5G, bit tentative, put spectrum auctions on delay and all this sort of thing, then it's a good place to be. And I think what's happening this year is that there's they've pretty much finished this 700,000 base station rollout, and there's now a second tender, as I understand it, for mainly kind of rural and less densely populated areas, which will be about 600,000 base stations using, less advanced kit potentially, not your massive MIMO stuff, but still a lot of money. I mean, if you look at China Mobile's earnings statements, they were saying that they're planning on spending, I think, even more this year than they did last year, and a huge amount of that's dedicated to 5G. So there's a lot of money to play for, and clearly the risk for Ericsson is that it just doesn't pick up any of that work. And I think the other interesting thing is that if you look at where Nokia fits into all of this. Last year they won nothing. You know, they came out of the 5G tenders for cities with absolutely zero. And I don't think the reason for that was necessarily geopolitics. I just think that they suffered in the same way that they've suffered setbacks in the US market. They were just not perceived to be as good. And and that's changing quite quickly. I mean, my own assessment is that they are getting a lot better, I think. And
and their last quarterlies that we covered were pretty healthy.
And the new CEO, Pekka Lundmark, has made quite a big deal about we want to be in China again. So I think there's a very
and I think they actually in this article, I think they actually mentioned
Nokia, did they?
Yeah, they mentioned Huawei ZTE and Nokia, which I thought was a bit pointed as alternatives.
They came out with some spurious figure, I see, for the
and
market
Finland,
share.
I don't think has done anything about China
Finland
one way or the other.
Finland hasn't done anything about China. This is the thing; they've not done that. You know, Nokia wants to get back into that market. They've got better equipment now than they had. I could see there is a possibility that Nokia this time round in this phase 2 ends up picking up the work in these other communities, you know, the less densely populated ones, and Ericsson doesn't get the work because of this pushback, you know. And then you've got both European vendors there in different parts of the country, providing equipment, and I think that's a very real possibility this year.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it's going to be a disaster for Ericsson, I should say, if it doesn't win work in China this year. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as Huawei facing, you know, semiconductor shortages and being turfed out of Western Europe and possibly.
But it's a major dent.
It's a dent, but it's
in the last quarterlies, China was a big chunk of
it wasn't. It was nothing in the last quarter. So Ericsson's revenues from China last year was about 8% of the total. So it's quite a lot.
Right. So don't be dissing me and saying
Q1,
I'm talking shit.
It wasn't even one of the top 5 countries.
Right.
So and number 5 on that list was the UK, which was 3% of Ericsson's revenues. And yet they still managed to turn in a quarter where they were fairly stable on revenues and profits went up a lot. So if they lost out in China this year, given that Del Oro's forecast for the development of the RAN market this year is that North America grows 2% and Europe grows 3%, which are both markets where Ericsson stands to do very well.
Yeah.
And it didn't really make anything in China not that it didn't make anything, but it made 3% or less of its revenues in China in the first quarter. It wouldn't be a disaster. It wouldn't be good, but it's not going to sort of...
I'll let the diss stand.
It's not going to destroy Ericsson. I mean, if China thinks that this is its big response to what's happened to Huawei, they're kidding themselves.
Oh, well, that's a really good point. So, you know, I think you've very well covered the implications to Ericsson. The broader implications of this getting more tit for tat, more transactional, more I'll see your ban and raise it a bigger ban.
Well, it has to be beyond telecom for them.
You know, we've chatted about it loads of times. You know, we're running out of time, so I don't want to get into it now. But when you get this tit for tat stuff going on, like we're seeing this awful situation in Israel right now, when things escalate, and people say, well, I'm retaliating for what they did, and I'm retaliating for what they did, and it just escalates and escalates and escalates. It's impossible to see how the thing ever de-escalates. And you know, and that's what I can see here. So they ban Ericsson. So then, you know, maybe Sweden doesn't do anything, but Sweden's allies go, well, we're not going to stand for that.
There are other things they could do to hurt Ericsson, you know, in terms of they've got their own equivalent of the entity list now, haven't they?
Yes.
And they could make it hard for Ericsson to operate its factories, for instance, in China, which supply countries other than China. They could make it hard for for Ericsson to get components from China. I mean, the thing that Ericsson's been doing quite well, I think, along with Nokia actually over the last few years, is sort of supply chain diversification. So they have plants and factories in a lot of other places at the moment. You know, they have this North American facility which caters entirely to the US market and employs very small number of people. I mean, the worst thing that China could do, the most extreme thing they could do to really kind of screw up a company like Ericsson, is to invade Taiwan and cut off its access to TSMC components. But if something like that happened, you're talking about...
Then there's all kinds of
problems. Then, I mean, Ericsson then becomes a minor character in a much bigger drama, doesn't it? But, yeah.
Okay. Right, I'm going to move that one along. Talking about Ericsson,
Segway.
Yeah, segue. No. I wrote a story. They come up with these things called a consumer report. Again, let me fire it up. Which can sometimes be fairly bland in so much as just like, yeah, here's what's going on. And, it's worthy, but it's not necessarily sort of exciting or headline worthy. But the thing I took for this one, the headline I wrote is 5G delivery not meeting consumer expectations. So this is their consumer lab study. I think it's the first one they've done for about a year and a half, maybe because of the coronavirus and all that. And the interesting thing about it, certainly what I extracted from it, was there are a few data points. So the first one is that there's a real mismatch between people who've got 5G capable phones and people who actually got 5G contracts. So in quite a lot of countries where there are 5G networks, so what's this first chart? This first chart, have a 5G phone but only a 4G subscription. So looking at some of the countries, you've got like in China, for example, even more of a segue, a third of Chinese people have got 5G phones but only a 4G subscription.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suspect it's higher in China though than it is in other parts of the world.
Yes, it is. That's why I
mean,
picked that
you
one
look
out.
at China Mobile actually now breaks down, doesn't it? The number of people who are 5G ready against the number of people who are actually on a 5G network. They've actually got that in their earnings report, and it's still a really high number are on the 5G network.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but there's still a third of people who've got a phone but are not on the network for whatever reason. France, you got 24% of people who've got 5G phone but only a 4G subscription, and then the other categories that Ericsson's got in this chart, which is claim 5G but have a 4G phone. So these are people who are just confused, who think they're on 5G but they haven't even got a fucking phone that's compatible with it.
How can that happen?
Yes.
Well, because this is
Has
a
it been
consumer
missold
report.
by the operators?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. But there are people going, yeah, I'm on 5G, and they're going, mate, was that thing at the top say?
That's worrying. Yeah.
That's the thing with me. I'm on 3, and I remember when I had 3G and then 4G came along, it was all automatic. It just like my plan just rolled out, and then same thing with 5G. I never had to change a thing.
With
that's interesting because I haven't had that with the.
Again, the drawback is the
I'd
coverage.
have to go
isn't
actively
great.
because they
looking
don't
for it.
sell it that way.
Yeah, but
You have to.
it's
still
interesting that he
included.
just gets automatically rolled up.
But again, the
Three's thing has been to do that. It's just been to sort of upgrade you, I think.
But the caveat is that it's not the best.
And
As
the
in,
network coverage isn't great.
the coverage is
And that's
But
fine, but no
you fall
one's
back
is.
on 4G when you're not in a 5G area
Yeah.
anyway. So how would
No
you
one's
notice,
is great.
considering it doesn't actually do anything useful?
No, and to be fair, I used to have a lot of nut spots in
Yeah.
4G that are now patched with 5G.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's good.
Okay.
I'm on 4G, and I've never ever had any. In fact, I have more problems with Wi-Fi than I've ever had with 4G.
That's a different discussion.
No, it's not, because 4G to me is a super reliable technology. In fact, I've even walked through areas or been in cafes when I've been working on the Wi-Fi connection and it's not been very good, and I've
And you've
switched and
just
tethered
tethered.
my laptop to 4G.
Yeah,
and got
yeah.
a much
That's
better
funny, I
connection.
would think the
4G's such a superb technology compared with what came before, and 5G just doesn't offer anything that's useful in an advantage. I mean, you're someone who gets off on lots of gigabytes and megabytes per month because of your video stuff, but to the average consumer,
I never use it.
Do you actually
to
get
the
off on
average
it?
I get off on
consumer,
it so high.
5G doesn't give them anything they
I don't know
really
why you
need.
said that.
It's an operator technology because they want to shift people onto a network that's not congested, and they
Yeah.
want to take advantage of new spectrum. There's no interest at all for a consumer in 5G.
Well,
No.
so there we are. So the interesting thing about the France one was, so they've got these 3 categories on this bar chart. They've got a 5G phone but only a 4G subscription, which, like I said, is like 33% in China and 24% in France. And then they've got 2 other categories: claim 5G but only 4G, which I just mentioned, and then there's people who've actually got 5G phone and they got a 5G connection. In France, the other 2 categories have got none. So there's no one from this survey in France that's actually got 5G. There's no one who even thinks they've got 5G when they haven't.
They don't know what it is.
But there are about a quarter of people who've got a 5G phone. So I don't know. I haven't really looked into how the French operators are doing on their rollout, but there's some kind of fuck up going on
I
there.
think the
Well,
point
I
is that
think
you
it's-
buy the latest
And the same
phone.
goes in Brazil. Brazil's got the same scenario.
The French rollout is at a much earlier stage than the
Oh, there
UK
we go.
rollout because they only awarded spectrum relatively recently.
So that must be it, because there are a bunch of other ones like in Latin America that are like that. So maybe it's just that.
But there are tons of people who upgrade to a new phone and it just happens to have 5G and they don't care about it. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's all it is. It's just representative of...
I don't know if you saw the BT update that came out a few weeks ago, or the EE one. We've reached 1 million 5G customers. Yep. Now, this service was launched 2 years ago, right? Nearly 2 years ago, because I was at the press conference and you couldn't go to them last year. So it was obviously the year before.
Right, yeah.
And it's taken them nearly 2 years to get 1 million 5G customers. Do you know how many customers they had 2 years into 4G? About 5 million.
Right.
You know, they've built it out slowly. They won't even tell you what percentage of the country they cover. They say we've got it in 400 towns. Well, what does that mean? You could stick a single base station in the town.
I'll tell you, there's a really funny one.
They insist they don't do that. They say, it's only when it's 2/3 of the population or when we've got something in the city centre.
There's a really funny one. O2 every now and then goes, we covered Southampton, and you go onto their own 5G checker, and it goes, nah.
Yeah, they haven't rolled it out very quickly and invested in it. So coverage is spotty, as Pierre's saying. Coverage is spotty.
Well,
People see, 4G was such a good thing to have after the disappointment of 3G that I think a lot of people wanted to actually go and use that service and take advantage of the new phones and the pricing plans, whereas 5G just doesn't come with the same incentive.
It's the old even number generations thing, isn't it?
It's just, I'm sorry, it's just turning out to be a bit of a shit technology. Well, I'm sure it's very good for the operators in terms of it's efficient, it works well, it frees up spectrum.
But for consumers, and that was the interesting thing about this, so obviously Ericsson...
For investors, I would say.
For investors, yeah, or for anyone other than operators looking to shave a bit of OPEX off the top. So the other thing, like I put in my subhead, it said, The consumer-led study found that many 5G phone owners either don't have a 5G subscription or expect more innovative services and apps. So the other
they do.
Yeah, so the other part of it was even those who are on 5G, even those who are on the light blue band on this bar chart, not that that's very helpful to even people watching on video. I should just the light blue band there. They're still going, okay, I've got 5G. So what?
Well, because they were probably expecting by now that 5G would be something like a flying car,
yes.
or
Jetsons.
Some kind of gyrocopter or something. Yeah. And what is it? Oh, it's slightly faster than 4G. Well, 4G was fast enough, thanks very much. I can still watch Netflix on it.
I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago. Sometimes the providers, the apps themselves, fail to take advantage of it. Like last week or 2 weeks ago, I noticed I had full bar 5G, right? So usually when I see that, I go, ooh, let's do a little speed test. So I do a speed test, and
it's great for speed tests.
It's exactly, and I get 600-700 megs. You know, obviously I don't have the millimeter wave antenna because I have a European iPhone. And then I thought, cool.
You're missing out there, Pierre, without that millimeter wave antenna.
And then I go on Spotify to download a podcast, which must be 300 megs at best, and it took 10 minutes.
Right.
It took with that speed, it should have taken 6 seconds. 10 seconds, and it didn't.
God, even on my 4G, I can download a Rogan in a minute or something.
The test said this is
so
your
either
speed.
The test was lying, or there was something going on with the app. Someone's lying.
It's just not. I don't know.
That's an odd one, yeah. But that's an actual instance where it would be useful. I've
tried that in 2 different locations. Had the same problem. Spotify, maybe it's just a Spotify issue.
I've very rarely been. Because normally if I'm on a train journey or something, I'm usually reading a book or drinking beer, but I've occasionally been on
a book like Identity Crisis.
Old school.
Like Identity Crisis, for instance. But sometimes I have watched movies on a 4G phone or programs, and you can do it really smoothly with 4G. I've never had any issues.
It just loads.
So what else am I going to do on 5G apart from put a virtual reality headset on that I can't afford and that isn't available these days and that there isn't any apps for?
No, then you might think, I'm about to go on this train. I would like to download this movie real quick. And then that might take 10 minutes.
There is the download option. Yeah, yes,
but look,
I know.
If it happens the same as Spotify, it's still shit.
No, but Pierre, Ian's right. In the utopian world, download is an obsolete concept, isn't it? Because everything's so fucking streamable.
Yeah.
But
on a train track
right now.
In a metal tube.
But if it works, if 4G connectivity works on a train track, there's no reason 5G should be any better on that. They just have to build out the coverage.
You're moving so fast that we need so many antennas along the way.
Yeah, I know. Moving is always.
Well, that's why I say utopian. But the reason I'm talking about utopian is we're talking about the gulf between what was promised, or at least what was insinuated, and the actual user experience. So back to the Ericsson.
The big hope is still the enterprise, isn't it? This is the thing about 5G, is that if it's ever going to live up to its promise, then it's going to have to do something in the business market that 4G hasn't done. It's not going to be a consumer story. It will be an enterprise story.
Yes.
And time is running out.
So that does need to be borne in mind.
2021. This technology was launched in 2019. All right, it's a long, long time before 6G comes along. I know it is. So saying time's running out is being a little bit over the top. But, they've got to start doing something in the next 2 or 3 years to show that this is actually going to make an impact on enterprise. So that leads to a sort of interesting
point at the end of it. There was a figure at the end of it where Ericsson sort of went, here's some bright ideas for operators of use cases. So they made a big point of going, look, this is about selling use cases, not speeds and feeds, it's fucking use cases. Don't say it's just a bit faster than 4G, that's not going to get you anywhere. But then their use cases, looking at this sort of chart they've got it's got lots of blobs in it.
The trouble is, it's a Consumer Labs report.
Yes, all right.
There aren't use cases for consumers.
All right, well, but these are the parameters of the thing I'm talking about. So stop.
Well, that's Ericsson's is cocked up there.
Pissing
I'm afraid,
on my chips.
Because
and so they talk about, but they come out with things like 5G TV. What's that? I don't even know what that is. Cloud gaming.
You could do that on 4G.
Yeah, and so there's all these things, and this isn't to diss Ericsson, but I think this is where I'm agreeing with you. Is given that this is a consumer constrained thing, all of these consumer use cases are still a bit meh.
Yeah,
as far as I'm concerned.
Sorry, comment on cloud gaming. The reason cloud gaming wouldn't work on 4G has got nothing to do with the fact that it's 4G and not 5G. It's to do with edge computing.
Right.
But also
it's to do with having your where you're getting your application from. It's to do with having a content delivery network that's close to the user or something. It's nothing to do with the fact that it's 4G or 5G.
I hate when you talk about use cases that are clearly done mostly at home.
Right. Yes. Like 5G TV.
5G TV. I'm like, you're gonna. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Or about the gaming. I mean, I guess people game on the bus.
You might game on the bus, I suppose, but.
Well, but it's all this stuff that's been chucked around. What else was in it? Interactive calling, video calling. People have been banging on about video calling since 3G.
You do video calling on 4G.
Perfect.
Yeah, maybe interactive calling. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's something more dynamic there. But look, the report's fine. But what's interesting about it, given that Ericsson has this vested interest to big up 5G and say let's do more 5G, the thing that came away from it is. They didn't explicitly say this, but my interpretation of the findings of the report was, you're dropping the ball, guys, do better. Now, presumably they think do better by buying more Ericsson kit and making 5G more ubiquitous. But I agree with you, Ian. I'm still struggling to see the compelling consumer.
And the other interesting thing as well about it is that, it should translate, into something that's an improvement over 4G in terms of the financials that the operators are reporting, whether it's slightly better margins or whether it's slightly more ARPU or whether it's any of those things. We just had BT report this week, which has been making a fuss about having 1 million 5G customers. What were their earnings like? They were shit. They were down massively, and they were down at the consumer business massively as well.
I think a parallel could be a little bit like the TVs. You've seen from 3G to 4G, a lot of more things were possible, like FaceTime and all that stuff. But now 4G to 5G, it's a bit like, when we went from standard to HD, massive. And then 4K, okay. Now 4K from your couch, you cannot see the pixels at all.
If you went to 8K, you wouldn't.
Yeah, if someone tells you 8K
are not
TV.
capable of noticing the difference.
Exactly. So then we're starting to reach, I don't know.
No, and we've known this from the start, since even before 5G came along, we were talking about the hype cycle of it. They're struggling, and Ian's right, it's going to be a B2B thing. But, it's just interesting to see one of the cheerleaders of 5G come out with a report that says, from the consumer side, we've got some work to do.
I think the trouble is it probably is all needed because we're all using more bandwidth and we're all gobbling up capacity.
But it's hard to get people to pay for it.
People don't see that. That's not of interest to the average Joe on the streets. Doesn't go around going, oh, I need my phone because, I can understand these operators are under a lot of pressure. They need to get people off their 4G networks and they need to take advantage of that 3.5 gigahertz spectrum. I need to go and get a 5G phone. He's not interested in that, is he?
No.
He wants to see some upside for himself.
Dave.
Or he won't bother. And he certainly won't pay a premium. He'll be like Pierre and get automatically upgraded if it's no extra cost.
Yeah.
But he or she, we should say, or no, I'm not going to
It could be Jane.
Won't pay for it, won't pay a premium. All right. We've been chatting for ages, haven't we? How long has it been?
2 hours.
20. Yeah.
Hour and 20. Okay, that's not too bad. We're going to wrap it up there. So thanks a lot, lads, and thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.